With a layer of mist rolling in, Steve added to the mystery by introducing an unscheduled stop en route to our final destination.
So, heading to Cortona, but before we go there, I want to show you a pretty amazing place.
Well, if we're going to see it, but now this fog's coming.
Well, actually, the reason why is the fog plays a big part in the story of this place. It's quite a phenomenon in this part of the world, and always has been. And very close to Cortona is one of the ancient world's greatest battlefields, and it's right by the lake. And I think it's a story with a contemporary message. So here we are at the site of the Battle of Lake Trasimeno. This is where the largest military ambush in history happened. 21st of June, 217 BC. Hannibal, Carthaginian, he of the elephants, invades, but doesn't invade, as of course you'd expect, which is across the 8 miles of water that separates North Africa from southern Italy. He comes famously through Spain, southern France, over the Alps with his elephants, defeats the Romans at Trebia to the north, and then heads south. The Romans, not used to defeat, not terribly happy. They basically kick out their existing leadership and bring in some new guys. Also, something that happens in Italy more than once.
Yeah, right.
So the proconsul Flaminius takes his army, moves up to where Arezzo is, in those days, Arminium, to try and intercept Hannibal. Hannibal goes around him, lays siege to Cortona, which is just over the hills, just over there. Flaminius is waiting for reserves, but he's under political pressure to produce a result. So he does something hasty, which is he rushes down with his army in pursuit of Hannibal to try and get a political and military victory.
This sounds very familiar so far.
Hannibal knows all this. He's deliberately despoiling all the countryside in order to provoke a response, which works. So Flaminius is rushing down from Arezzo with about 30,000 men. What he doesn't know is that in the last couple of months, the Carthaginian army is swelled up to about 50,000 men. Hannibal takes them over the hills and he positions them all around this amphitheatre. Natural amphitheatre, hills on 3 sides, lake to the back. It's the perfect position for an ambush. And there's mist, as there is today, which obscures the fact that in these hills, he's got 50,000 men hidden. Flaminius rushes in here with his troops, and the Carthaginians do something, Hannibal does something very clever, which is he puts a small body of men right down there, and they see the Roman army and they turn and they flee up the hill. The Romans, used to people running away, go, all right lads, let's go get them. And they rush in here, not even in full battle armour, not even wearing full kit. They just rush in, and then as soon as enough of the army are in this natural amphitheatre, the signal goes up, Carthaginian army descends en masse on Flaminius, and they massacre the entire Roman army. Now this is 30,000 men. Population of Rome at the time is maybe 300,000-400,000.
Yeah.
So it's a huge percentage of their manpower. So in 2 hours, 15,000 are dead, 15,000, including Flaminius, who dies just over there with his bodyguard, all of them hacked to pieces, and 15,000 surrender, mostly down by the lake where they're trapped. And that is Rome's worst defeat in history at the time. Even to this day, 22 centuries later, there's never been a larger, more successful ambush than that. What did Flaminius do wrong? Well, he did 3 things. One is he acted hastily.
Yep.
He wasn't really under any time pressure, but he was under political pressure, which is what he responded to. Militarily, the right thing to do would be wait to reinforcements. So that's one thing. Secondly, he rushed to battle. Never a good idea. Never rush to a defining conflict, right? Prepare. But thirdly, and most importantly, he underestimated his opponent.
Yeah.
Now, all of the greatest military and probably investment disasters are always based upon a significant error of underestimating.
Well, a combination of those three things
your
a lot of the time,
opponent.
right?
And I think that Brussels is now in a position where it systematically underestimates its opponents. So convinced is it of its right and might that that's what they consistently do. Mr. Nigel Farage was massively underestimated by Brussels, right? They thought he was a clown.
Well, as was Grillo, right? Pepe Grillo was a clown.
He is a clown.
and was underestimated.
And yet, Britain, the UKIP movement succeeded in getting a referendum and succeeded in winning the referendum. Not UKIP alone, but they did it. Brussels almost provoked that. And now Brussels is provoking the Italians to possibly a definitive response, which could really be a defining moment in the development and the history of the European Union. So you come to places like this. Okay, it's a long time ago. It's very peaceful now. But, very real, very physical, very visceral. 2 hours, history changed here.
But man doesn't seem to learn from a story like that. It's remarkable to me.
Yes. Well, it's every time the narrative changes, right? And the belief system alters, and people still, and people think, well, those guys were fools, but we're different.
But we're smarter, yeah.
This time it's different.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do get the sense, not only that underestimating your enemy, but it's not just the two combatants here. For me, everyone has been lulled to sleep, like Brussels has been, by the might of Brussels, or the fact that these skirmishes have happened over the last 7 or 8 years, and every time it's kind of gone away. And people are now, that's the base case now. The base case is not, what are the risks if this blows up? The base case is, they always figure out a way to make this stuff go away, and they'll do the same this time, so we can ignore it. And I don't know, I just get a feeling that that's not the case this time.
It's something the Italians, who are almost always divided about everything, are actually fairly united on this.
Yeah.
The lessons from history are always instructive, and hearing Steve talk about the Battle of Trasimeno rang so many bells in my head it was almost deafening. But time was moving on, and our next stop was the walled city of Cortona. But on the way, I suddenly realised that something was missing.
So what's just struck me? I haven't seen any really nice. I haven't seen Ferraris or Porsches or Maserati. I just don't see any nice cars on the road. It's weird.
So you know why that is?
Well,
Because a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, one of the ways that the Italian government wanted to start focus on raising its tax revenue was they sent out the traffic police to stop any really nice cars on the roads and asking them how much tax they paid last year.
you're kidding me.
No. It was a real thing. It was a real thing. So if you were driving a nice car, you were being stopped constantly and asking what your tax number was.
right?
Yeah, no. And so the tax department were like on the line, right, cross-referencing people's motor registration with their tax records.
Wow.
And the answer was, well, sir, if you've only paid €2,000 tax last year because you're earning £8,000 a year,
Right.
why are you
driving a Ferrari?
Why are you driving this Ferrari? No, it was a huge thing. It was a real thing. I mean, it wasn't just a few odd incidents that got picked up by the press. I mean, it was really widespread. So instantly, 4 or 5 years ago, you could buy a second-hand Ferrari in this country for like nothing because people were desperate to get rid of them. Yeah, they even drove up to Cortina, on the Italian lakes in the north, and took all of the number plates at this very fancy hotel where wealthy Italians used to spend the weekend, and went into the lobby and said, "We wish to speak to the following people."
Wow.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
no, it was a real thing. So all of a sudden, boom, just like that.
Well, it's amazing because we've been driving all morning, and I don't think I've seen one super sports car.
No, millionaire tax dodgers are these days driving a Panda. Hopefully as beaten up as possible.
That's amazing.
So it was a real thing. And of course, it caused enormous resentment. But I think to a certain extent, yeah, they had to do it. Tax collection in Italy has been a huge problem. And then it comes down to this whole idea of how do you solve a fiscal problem in a country that has a deeply systematic tax avoidance. You know, you used to be able to say that Italian habits of paying little tax meant that you could afford a really nice car, but the roads were terrible. And I remember once I was actually literally stuck behind a Maserati going down this terribly potholed road. It was a beautiful car, and I was like, this is the Italian dilemma, right?
Yeah.
You can have private wealth in public squalor, or you can have it go the other way around.
Yeah.
No one seems to have found the balance. You know, the Italian roads really got really bad around 2012, 13, 14, and they were really a direct reflection of just how bad the economy was. No one was paying anyone, including the municipal government wasn't paying people, so they just stopped working on the roads. In some ways, although we're in a sort of pseudo-crisis environment, the economy in many ways is much better now than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Certainly, you can actually get paid. You know, people really just stopped paying each other.
Yeah.
And that negative multiplier, really was very palpable here in Italy. I had a lot of reasonably wealthy people, ask me if I could lend their business money because they just run out of credit. And of course, none of it was coming from the banks because the banks had blown their load and had no availability of credit, even to good businesses, with good credit. So, classic example of how a banking crisis immediately filters through into the real economy. But although the politics feels worse, and the share prices of the banks suggest that quite a few things are worse, in some ways I think the real economy is actually a bit better.
There are so many forces pulling at both the fabric of Italian society and the European project as a whole. And as we made our way inside the ancient walls of Cortona, it seemed like the perfect location to discuss perhaps the most polarising threat to the EU's survival, and one that, given its geographic location, resonates particularly strongly with Italians.
So there's one thing that we haven't touched on, which is kind of the elephant in the room for a lot of these problems.
Which is why you can't get a cappuccino in Italy after noon.
Listen, I'm not happy about this whole drinking tea in the afternoon.
I know it's come as a horrible shock to you.
Cappuccinos should be universal.
I'm afraid in Italy, cappuccino is only available in the morning.
Well, I'm not happy about that, but immigration.
Yes.
This is something that is a problem in Italy from a political standpoint. It's also looking like a problem from a societal standpoint. And you've got experience of this in Germany as well, I know. This is real, and it's been kind of marginalised as a debate that only racists and far-right people have. But there's more to it than that, it seems to me.
Italy is at the pointy end of this because of its geography.
Yeah.
We've just come from Trasimeno, battle between Romans, southern Italians, and North Africans.
Right.
Carthage is part of North Africa. Why are they fighting? Because they're so close. There's only one power that can be dominant in the Western Mediterranean, and that's what those Punic Wars were about. That's why Carthage is invading Italy, and it comes back now. Once again, this geography is a very important part of the Italian destiny. It's very close to Africa. It's very easy to get to now. And the Italians are looking for a European solution.
Right.
Which doesn't seem unreasonable given they're constantly being told they're part of a European Union. But when it comes to allowing immigrants in, everyone gets very nationalistic. Brussels doesn't have much to say on the issue.
Right.
In fact, it tries to keep it quiet. Now there's another part, which is that both Germany and Italy do need immigration. There's going to be a shortage of people in these countries. Italy and Germany both have quite poor demographics. Italian family size is tiny now. I think the average Italian woman has 1.2, 1.3 children. So there's a long-term issue that you're going to need some immigration. The problem is, it's not controlled. And it's very much the wrong type of people.
And unlike Germany, which currently has an unemployment rate of 3.7% and 1.2 million job vacancies, Italy has an unemployment rate of 9.6% and a youth unemployment rate of 31%, and really doesn't need a lot of unskilled labour coming into the country. It's really had a very strong impact on Italian attitudes to the support they're getting, because what they see is, and I think they have a point, is a European Union that is very demanding about certain things, this current budget, for example, and really not very helpful when they have a problem. Why is it an Italian problem with their geography, when they're supposed to be an open border? But the Italians are having to bear this burden disproportionately.
Well, the problem for the EU, obviously, is that any problem is a 27-nation problem. That if you give a solution to that problem to one nation, by their own rules, you have to kind of offer it to all. You can't mix and match and say, well, look, here's a problem Italy has, we'll fix it for Italy. But no, Greece, sorry, that doesn't apply to you.
Immigration is this problem that has become very difficult to talk about. People can't talk about it rationally.
Exactly right.
No one wants.
Which is why we've left it to last.
No one wants to sound racist. It's, ooh, that's racism.
It's a powerful word.
And let's face it, it's still a phenomena in most societies, and it does inform the debate, and it does motivate people to vote in a certain way. Clearly, some of the Brexit debate was racist. Now, the Remainers tried to suggest that everyone involved in who was a leaver was somehow a racist, and they tried to tar them with, it's just a group of small-minded racists. That's clearly completely unfair and untrue. But you also have to be very naive to say that racism didn't play a part in that debate. Similarly, the rise of the Northern League is partly about immigration, and it's partly about race. It's naive to pretend it isn't. But how do you have a debate about this in a rational way? It's extremely hard, because everyone rushes to a position and then holds it. It's a big problem everywhere, right? In America, Britain, and in Italy it's the same. Liberals just see a red flag, which is we cannot allow racism to inform any of our debate or any of our actions. That's clearly not working for Italy.
But I think for the liberal side of the argument, it's not so much racism, it's exclusion of any kind. Right? You cannot put up any barrier, any wall. You know, the whole idea of Europe was to tear down barriers, to tear down walls, and it's naive to think that at no point in the future might you need to re-erect a fence instead of a wall just to slow things down. But I think, to your point, we've reached the stage where if you even bring this subject up, it's very easy to shout you down by labelling you a racist. Right? You don't want immigration, therefore you're a racist. And as soon as you're tarred with that brush, it's very difficult. There aren't any right parties anymore. In the media, everything's far right. The Northern League are far right, and Five Star are far right. There's no right and left anymore.
I think, the kaleidoscope of political parties means this right and left axis has become very unhelpful. I mean, there are still some classically leftist parties, but if you look at Italian politics, you can't really put any of them on that classic, communist through to, ultra-conservative spectrum that comes from France. These parties have a series of, it's a buffet sort of manifesto that they have. There's no real, I've said it in the past, I mean, there doesn't seem to be any real manifesto here. There's a series of grievances, and immigration is one, and it's a bona fide one. If you've got 10% unemployment, any sort of immigration is a problem. Italians are leaving Italy to go and find jobs in Germany and other places, because there's not enough jobs here. So, of course, if you are unemployed in Italy, and a lot of young people especially are, and you see more people arriving in your town, that's not a welcome thing.
But we've come back to this all throughout the day today. Everywhere we've been, we've talked about division, we've talked about separation, we've talked about this fracturing, not just of Italy historically, but of society and of the European Union. And it feels as though that is something which just sits across not just Italy, not just southern Italy, not just Europe, but the world at the moment. There is this And that has to be telling us something, that the fact that everybody is excluding and is withdrawing and coming through, that has to tell us something about a broader theme that is occurring naturally. It's not just a coincidence.
No, it's not. It's an important part of what's going on in Italian politics. It's an important part of their negotiation with the European Union, and it's the important part of a lot of people's in Italy's questioning of what is the European Union doing for us.
Yes.
It has brought lower interest rates to Italy, right? I mean, Italian rates were much higher last century than they were this century. So it definitely has brought.
But as we've seen, the effect that that's had on the banking system.
Yes, it's not an unmitigated advantage,
No.
is it? It has obviously caused some significant problems too. And now, those problems, do make Italy something of a prisoner of the system, because
That's exactly it.
the banking system is so weak now that it cannot survive without external support, and that external support is probably coming from Europe.
You've mentioned a couple of times today this is inflexibility of the European Union, and this always interests me, because going in, common currency, open borders, low interest rates, great, achieved all three things. But there doesn't seem to be any understanding or any acknowledgement of the fact that if everything's cyclical, which history tells us it is, and we've seen a lot of history today that's all been cyclical, there will be a time when those three things reach the other end of the cycle, when a common currency is not a good idea, open borders are a bad idea, and low interest rates are, if not unnecessary, possibly deleterious to the future. And it feels like we've reached that point. All three of those right now are at the root of the problem, but there is no flexibility around it.
Well, cheap money's clearly caused a lot of problems in a lot of places in the world.
Yeah.
Interestingly, we haven't seen a lot of inflation in Europe. No. Not even in Germany, which ought to be overheating now. And we keep looking for signs of it because we have a decent-sized business in Germany. It's really not there. It should be there. You've got full employment. You've got a shortage of labour. You've got incredibly low interest rates. Still no inflation. So I'm not really sure that Europe is ready for higher rates. Certainly Italy, given its problems with the banking system, given its relatively weak economy, probably would not really cope very well with significantly higher interest rates. It's another reason why leaving the euro is just a pipe dream right now. They could do it, but it would be a terrible idea for the banking system. It would be a terrible idea for the Italian economy, because interest rates would go very high. Well, one of the things we've spoken about a long time in the past is, if you're investing in European countries, you have to look at the underlying currency. And the underlying currency is not necessarily the euro, because as we've seen from the UK, things do change and can change. There's no reason why Italy cannot go back to having a lira. If you're invested here, you've got to take that into consideration.
Sure. It's a very real risk.
If you're buying something with euros and overnight it changes to lira, that could be a very significant position. Now, that's one of the reasons why what we do in the investment business we've got in Italy is very modest. That and many of these other problems. I still think it's a marvelous place to have a home, and a marvelous place to have a base and to spend some time. But would I want to have a very significant part of my wealth tied up in Italian assets at a time when the political landscape is changing very fast? Because I might end up with a lot of Italian lira.
Yeah, exactly right.
Just when I wouldn't want them.
Well, and potentially euro-denominated debt, right? Which is, any leverage you've employed is a major problem.
Whereas if the euro were to break up, where we do own a lot of assets, it's Germany, we'd end up with a Deutschmark asset and European debt, which would be an extremely good position to be in. So Italy's in something of a conundrum.
Well, there's a bunch of conclusions for us to talk about and talk through the implications of all this, but I reckon we should do that over some good Italian food, because there's nowhere better to sit and do that. So why don't we go and get some food and mull this over on the drive back, and then sit and chew it over a nice bottle of red and some good food.
Sounds good. I've been driving all day.
All right, fair enough.
Our day in the Italian countryside had been both fascinating and educational. But as Steve and I chatted by the pool over a glass of Chianti, my thoughts turned to the investment implications of everything we'd seen and talked about. And so, with a bowl of pasta waiting for us, it was time to head inside and try to make sense of it all.
We need to think about what this means from an investment standpoint, because when I look at it, I can't help but think this is bearish for the euro, because I think this pressure is going to build on Italy, and the more people understand the chance of this accident happening is increasing, I suspect they're going to have to start thinking about whether that's going to be a fatal blow to the euro. I can't help but think that the Italian banking system is going to struggle. You look at Unicredito, you look at obviously MPS, you look at all the Italian banks, and for that matter, things like the Spanish banks, they're on their knees. I mean, they really are in all sorts of trouble and have been. There's been no bounce. We haven't seen the bounce.
Share prices reflect that. I mean, there was a bounce.
Absolutely.
There was a bounce, but it's given it all up.
It's given it all up. And very easily, they kind of rolled over and went straight back down again.
I mean, whether or not you want to short something that's as beaten up as the Italian banks now, I don't know.
No, you probably don't.
Certainly not as a long-term short. I think...
But I don't think you want to buy them because you think that this is going to be okay. I think that's a big gamble, to buy things like that and think, you know what? They might just pull this off.
There's a chance of recapitalisation, which could be heavily dilutive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously especially in the ones that are just wards of state. I don't really know enough about it to have a strong opinion. I haven't felt tempted enough to do the work to really understand the balance sheets. I expect that it would be really hard to understand an Italian balance sheet in its current condition, because I'm sure the disclosure is terrible.
Yeah. Well, what about BTPs? Because I know that's something you've played in the past successfully. When you look at the spreads to places like Germany, do they offer value? Or, I can't help but think that this is a creeping crisis. It's a creeping realisation. And with the ECB ready to pull back on their buying of bonds, that's going to be detrimental to it. Everywhere I look, I see things stacking up horribly. In the short to medium term for Italy. I really do.
There's clearly a level of justified fear already in the price.
Yes.
So you're clearly not getting in the trade when everyone's thinking the opposite. I don't think anyone's thinking things are just going swimmingly here in Italy, and the spreads reflect that. So the $64 question for any trader is the spread wide enough? Well, the spread's been a lot worse, a lot worse. That turned out to be a great trade, going long Italy. Clearly, we're not at the bottom. Clearly, things could get a lot worse.
Yeah.
And we haven't got all the bad news priced in the Italian spread. And of course, because the Italian debt is so big, and it's so much bigger than anyone else's, the debt matters doubly, because Italy can't afford expensive debt. The Italian government can't afford it because it starts eating up all of the budget,
right,
which is already under strain. So there is a risk if this fight with the European Union and Brussels, let's call it Brussels because it's not really with the European Union yet, gets worse, the ECB refuses to help, Italy could find itself in a very difficult position. So there's clearly a trade either way. It doesn't feel to me like the risk reward in any of those trades is exceptionally good. On the euro, I think that lower for longer on interest rates seems a reasonable bet. A lot of people were moving towards a position where clearly the ECB was going to reduce it or reduce or stop its QE. And they were feeling this was another step towards being part of a global tightening following the US. I'd be surprised if that happened, because although German conditions remain strong, at the margin, they're weakening.
Yes, I agree.
The PMIs are all heading lower. They're heading lower in Asia as well, and that's something we watch really closely. You're going to get no help from Asia anytime soon. So that's going to be a drag. At the margin, German conditions which lead Europe are slightly weakening. We haven't seen any inflation yet. The need for the European Union to have a anti-inflationary interest rate rise doesn't seem to me to be at all clear. US, on the other hand, will continue to raise rates. So the interest differential is likely to widen. That's not unexpected. But the euro at its current level, fundamentally it feels cheap now. Not nearly as cheap as it could be if we saw a situation of strain turn to a situation of crisis. What would cause that? Italy.
Well, exactly right. You know, I think the euro is probably due for a bounce against the dollar, but that's more going to be the dollar taking a pause or perhaps weakening than it is the euro. But when I look at likely scenarios, you know, everywhere you look, economies are slowing, undoubtedly, and that's something that has kind of sneaked up on people. And I suspect you're going to see sovereign yields heading lower again. People are going to be looking to buy sovereign bonds. So, and I would imagine that if that comes against the backdrop of this Italy problem intensifying, it's just a great opportunity to see those spreads widen out. I mean, that to me looks like the obvious trade is for a widening of Italy spreads against the likes of Germany. And I think that you'll get a kicker to that, not just because that's the way it's going to happen, but you're going to see a lot of people looking to add sovereign bonds to their portfolios in the light of slowing economies, and they're going to be herding into Germany, but even if they're just uncertain about Italy. It won't be buy one, buy all like it was last time.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, but these are all relatively short-term trades.
Yeah.
They're all trades where the risk-reward is possibly fair, but it's not overwhelming. There are also plenty of possibilities for things to calm down. There's plenty that the European Union, if it wanted to, could do to help the situation in Italy.
Yeah, well, that would be interesting if they did that, if they buckled. That would completely shock me. Honestly, that would shock me.
The term buckle.
All right,
The term buckle is the problem.
But for them, a slight capitulation or a slight...
No, not a capitulation. How about a negotiation to accept the fact that conditions in Italy are moving against the population and that the need for some form of extra stimulus is clear.
Because they're not Italians, they're Europeans. And because the Brussels powers that be cannot say, well, we'll negotiate with Italy on their special terms. That's been the problem all along. I think you and I...
And what does that make you feel about the future of the European Union?
Well, exactly right. I think you and I have chatted a lot about this today and over the years about this inflexibility is going to be their downfall. I just keep coming back to the fact that despite everything we've seen, everything we've talked about, there's no real way of knowing what's going to happen here because it's such a complex country, it's such a complex people, it's such a complex situation within an intractable position on both sides that I don't think there is going to be a designed solution for. I think an accident of some sort almost has to happen.
I think what's clear is that Italy is currently in a very poor position to weather a cyclical downturn.
Yes.
A lot of people are watching almost all data, but corporate data especially, like hawks looking for peak of cycle. What comes after peak of cycle? Trough. Italy has not recovered from the 2008 crisis. Its economy is smaller.
Yep.
Unemployment's still very high. Level of distress is still very high. If we are at peak cycle and that we are heading into a global downturn, several countries in Europe, Italy being the most important, are in a very poor position.
Yeah.
And if you are, I think, of a view that we are headed into a downturn, then it's quite easy to draw for some pretty negative conclusions about the weakest economies in Europe, which have not recovered from the last cycle. That looks like structural decline, structural decline rather than cyclical decline, right? But you don't, it's a technical analysis would see it as lower lows and lower highs.
Sure.
So I think that much is clear. I don't see an overwhelming trade here. That's partly because I'm not looking for it. I don't nor do I see any overwhelming business opportunity as a way of playing it. What I do see is a place I love going through a fairly traumatic period in its political life.
Yeah.
Things changing rapidly, and rapid change creates a level of unpredictability. And I think your point is exactly right, which is that back in the status quo and that Europe always winning and everything holding together has been a reasonably good trade, Brexit accepted. I think that level of complacency is very dangerous now. And if there is a trade, it's don't assume that the next 3 years in the European Union are going to be, all Mr. Draghi has to do is make a bullish statement of intent and all the bears are going to run away and everything's going to be fine. That much I'd agree with. But one of the lessons of history is that people muddle through, right? The sun will rise tomorrow. In Italy, actually, we'll see it.
That's right.
Italy will continue to be a fine place to live for most Italians, right? The food is great and cheap. The wine is great and cheap. The weather's excellent. We're not going to see, peasants with pitchforks. People aren't going to run around in the streets stabbing each other. That's London, isn't it? No, I mean, yes, problems. But, the one thing you see from looking at century after century in Italy is that the good things in this country persist.
Well, look, it's been a fantastic day, and thank you for the tour and the conversation and the food and the wine, and we'll see what happens. But one thing we know is Italy's not going away, and it really is a fantastic place to be. So cheers.
My pleasure.
Whatever lies in Italy's future is pivotal, not just to the country's citizens, but to Europe as a whole. And as the skies grew darker over the Necone Valley, I couldn't help but think about what a perfect metaphor that was for everybody concerned.